Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. Now, I have to admit to being very late to the Russian cruiser party, but I like what I see with ships like the Molotov, the Premium Tier 6, and some of the replays that you guys have been sending in. And I did like the Svetlana at Tier 4 when I was testing these ships out, so I thought, well, better late than never. And I started grinding my way down the Russian or Soviet cruisers. Got to Tier 3 and got a very pleasant surprise with the Bogatyr, which is basically the Russian St. Louis. It's a protective cruiser, so it has up to 70mm of armour. The guns, it can be kind of confusing when you're looking at the Bogatyr and trying to decide which guns to fit, because the stock 152mm guns on paper look better. They have the same 9-second reload as the 130mm upgraded guns. They have the same 36-second turret rotation speed as the upgraded 130mm guns, and they do 10% more high explosive damage. But have a look at the shell velocity, 792.5 meters per second with the armor piercing, and even slower, 753 meters per second with the high explosive. Let's swap them out for the 130s. Now you get exactly the same number of guns, 16, and while the reload and the turret rotation speed are exactly the same, and the high explosive damage is 10% less, look at the shell velocity. 823 meters per second for both the armor piercing and the high explosive, so you're going to be able to consistently land shots on target more often with the 130 mils because the shells don't take as long to get there, and you're not going to have to compensate for reduced shell velocity when you switch between ammunition types. Now you may still have your doubts, because 10% more high explosive damage is still 10% more high explosive damage, and they all fire just as fast as each other. However, that doesn't take into account crew skills like basic firing training, which boosts the reload of main battery guns, and it's only a tier 1 skill and only costs you 1 point. Boosts the reload of main battery guns with a caliber of up to and including 139mm, which does not apply to the stock guns because they're 152mm, but does apply to the upgraded guns because they're 130. And so that whole 10% damage per minute increase that you have with the 152mm guns suddenly doesn't apply anymore. So the 130mm with the right crew skills are definitely an upgrade over the 152s, and it's not a particularly slow ship with a top speed of 24 knots, and it's reasonably manoeuvrable. As far as the stealth is concerned, well, yeah, it's alright. Certainly nothing to get excited about. So I thought, okay, let's give this thing a go. I remember testing this thing out when I had access to the Soviet cruisers before they went live, and I really didn't think too much of it. It never really stood out from the crowd in the way that the Svetlana at Tier 4 did. I loved the Svetlana. It's a very simple and easy to understand ship. It's basically a Soviet Tier 4 Dresden. Lots and lots of guns that fire very quickly. The Bogatyr, on the other hand, seemed unremarkable. And yet since then I've seen people in replays doing exceptionally well in this ship, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. So this is my very first game in the Bogatyr, and I wasn't expecting a great deal out of this match because I'm a Tier 3 cruiser in a Tier 5 battle. Small fish, big pond. Oh ye of little faith. This ship packs a few surprises. The name of the ship, by the way, is a reference to Russian folk heroes, kind of like a knight-errant in Western culture, like Sir Lancelot of the Knights of the Round Table. That's basically what the name means. Two of these ships were built for the Baltic Fleet, and two were built for the Black Sea Fleet. A fifth ship was planned, but she was so badly damaged in the fire after the hull of the ship was laid down that she was cancelled. Of the 4 ships that were built, the lead ship of the class, the Bogatyr, was actually built in Germany. She was completed in 1902, saw service for 20 years, scrapped in 1922, and the machinery was used to repair the 4th ship in the class, the Comintern. Although it started off named the Pamiat Mercuria. It was built by the Nikolaev dockyard in 1900, launched in 1903, completed in 1907, and she mutinied during the revolution in 1905. She was later sunk as an artificial breakwater in Georgia after her guns had been removed for use in shore batteries. The second ship of the class, the Oleg, was built in St. Petersburg and took part in the Battle of Tsushima, but escaped and was interned at Manila. She was finally sunk by a British coastal motorboat with a single torpedo in Kronstadt Harbour in 1919 during the Baltic Naval War. Third ship in the class, the Kagul, saw a couple of name changes. It was renamed the Ochakov and later the General Kornilov, built at the Sevastopol dockyard, completed in 1905 and seized by the White Russian forces in the Russian Civil War, interned in Bogatyr in 1920, and sold for scrap in 1933. Of the 4 ships, the Comintern was the only one that survived to sea service in World War II, but the only thing of note that happened to her was she got damaged by German aircraft in 1942. As protected cruisers, the armour on these ships wasn't actually too bad. The deck was 35mm thick with 70mm on the sides of the ship. The turrets at the front and rear with 2 guns each had 125mm of armour in the front, 90mm at the side and 30mm on top. 4 of the 152 and later 130mm guns in the casements on the side were protected with 80mm outer sides and 35mm inner bulkheads. However, 4 more of the guns were only protected by 25mm gun shields. The ammunition hoists were protected by 35mm of armour as well, and the machinery spacers were protected by 85mm of armour. In theory, provided this armour layout has been faithfully modelled in the game, the Bogatyr should, providing it's a top tier ship in a tier 3 battle, it should be very, very difficult to citadel, in pretty much exactly the same way that the St. Louis, the American tier 3 cruiser, is. And these 2 ships do share, well, they have a lot of similarities. They're tough, and they've got lots and lots and lots of guns. As the enemy team are about to find out the hard way. With the upgraded fire control system, these guns have an 11.4 kilometre range, which is not bad, which means that kamikaze R, and I just saw some shots hitting a target inside that smoke screen, so that's where I'm aiming. And, well, he's probably going to be reversing to get off the rocks because he did run himself aground, so adjust my aim to the rear, and yep, there he is, and start lighting him up. Turning the ship slightly to starboard to be able to get more guns firing at him. And that's one kamikaze R, who is really sorry he didn't use the detonation flag. First blood to the guy in the tier 3 Russian cruiser. One enemy premium tier 5 destroyer deleted from existence. Well, he didn't really make it hard, did he? I mean, he ran himself aground. Other people were hitting him, so I could tell exactly where I needed to aim in order to land my shots on target. Predicted that he was going to be reversing to get off the rocks, and, well, yeah, not flying a detonation flag, so his magazine went up like a torch. Oh, and there's another one. Guns on target, although it looks like he's slowing and he's popped smoke. And I cannot remember the range of the kamikaze R's torpedoes, but it doesn't matter whether you can or you can't. If you don't know for sure whether or not you're safe from a torpedo attack, then act as if you're not. So I start adjusting course and speed, but the torpedoes are visible. He's fired them at the Congo. The Congo detected them. And despite using his WASD hacks, the Congo did actually take one of them in the bows of the ship. So those torpedoes are no real threat to me. And then some fire comes out of that smoke screen, and one of these cheeky little buggers is actually firing at me. He set me on fire. I'm in a cruiser, not a battleship. I can't repair the fire damage. So despite the fact that I was only burning in one location, I put the fire out. And there's the kamikaze R again, or possibly another one. I'm not entirely sure at this point. He's a destroyer, I'm in a cruiser with lots and lots of guns. I start lighting him up, but he gets taken out by a friendly destroyer. And that leaves me free to concentrate on the St. Louis. Now, this is much more of a test of the Bogatyr's capabilities because, well, you know what the St. Louis is like. And if you don't know what the St. Louis is like, then I invite you to take part in a couple of tier 3 battles and you'll soon learn a healthy respect for this little American monster. But St. Louis, tier 5 game or not, can look after itself. It's a very, very tough little ship, so I'm using the high explosive on him rather than the armour piercing. Maybe if I was using the 152mm guns, I might have risked the armour piercing because he is sailing broadside on, but I know how tough the St. Louis can be. And, well, the high explosive is getting the job done. It's doing like 2,000 damage per salvo, and it's firing quickly. So there's no real need for me to switch ammunition types at the moment. Surprised I haven't set him on fire yet, and I'm obviously not the only one shooting at him, which is good news, because it means he's not firing back at me, he's occupied with somebody else. And there we go, there's a fire set. He's turning in, presenting less of a target. Yeah, there's no way he's getting out of there. He is doomed. Doesn't matter which way he turns, he's just presenting a big, fat, broad target to somebody, and bang, kill number 2. With the St. Louis dispatched, I noticed that our flag is under attack, and somebody else is also radioing for assistance. Now, with a top speed of 24 knots, I'm certainly not the slowest ship in the team, even if I am one of the smallest, and I'm certainly capable of turning around and heading back to defend the cap. And, oh, there he is, and he's inside my 11.4 kilometre gun range, so, okay, let's start lighting him up. And it's another one of those pesky kamikaze R's. But we also, as I turn, have two kamikaze R's rushing back to do something about it. So he's just outside of my gun range now. And I'm never going to catch a kamikaze R. I mean, 24 knots isn't bad for a cruiser, but it's not destroyer levels of speed. So he's outside of range, but I'll keep heading back because, well, you never know. Although, right now, they've managed to score a crit on him. They've knocked his engine out. You can tell by the fact that there are flames coming out of his smokestack. And he's not repaired it, so I'm reasonably confident, despite the fact that he's got some torpedoes in the water against these two friendly destroyers, but I'm pretty confident that these guys are going to catch him before I can get back and do anything about it. So I'll turn around and start heading down the middle. Surprisingly, and it's good to see, that one of the friendly battleships, the Bogey, the Japanese Tier 4, is also coming back to attempt to head that guy off and run him out of options, but the kamikaze is not going down without a struggle. He's actually got some torpedoes in the water, and oh, there's one, and there's another one. Saw the Miyogi coming and thought I'll just get some fish in the water before my inevitable demise, as I'm being chased down by 3 enemy ships, or 4 if you count me. And he managed to get a couple of torpedoes into the battleship before he eventually went down. So the cap is safe, and now I can concentrate on, oh, hello, what's this? Now, that's the German Tier 4, the Karlsruhe. He's on full health. However, even though I've taken damage, I still have more health than him. I'm Tier 3, and he's Tier 4, so that's another good thing about the Bogatyr. It does get a lot of health. He has a maximum health total of 19,700. My maximum health total, 23,300. So even though we're both cruisers and he's a tier higher than me, and I've already taken some damage, going into this fight, I've still got more health than him. Which is nice. Now, I haven't yet been seen, I don't think. And he's been lit up by other ships, and he's already coming under fire from somebody. Now, I've got the high explosive loaded, but I'm planning on trying out the armor piercing, because the German Tier 4 cruiser, it's not particularly heavily armored. So with the armor piercing first, and he has seen me, and I'm starting to become the target of his shots, because hey, why not? I'm a Tier 3 cruiser. The high explosive does good damage and sets him on fire. Now I cue the armor piercing, and I don't quite have the flat side of the ship, but there's plenty of target to shoot out there. And the initial armor piercing salvo is kind of disappointing. It only does about 1,000 damage. But then he starts turning in, giving me a much flatter target to shoot at. And my second armor piercing salvo does 3,000 damage. I switch back to the high explosive anyway to finish him off, because, well, it's just more consistent. I know what the high explosive can do. Now I see some torpedoes in the water there, and I set him on fire again with the high explosive, and I know he's just used his damage control ability because the initial fire that I set is out, so that's going to continue burning, and then suddenly I get warned for team damage, and what the hell? And oh, friendly destroyer crossed in front of me. And that kind of distracts me, because I'm not paying attention to the torpedoes, although I have seen them when I start slowing and turning, but my WASD hacks aren't quite up to scratch, and I do take one in the bow of the ship and suffer a lot of damage, but I'm ready to continue firing at this Karlsruhe as he turns around to avoid the torpedoes, and there's my third kill. Tier 4 enemy cruiser. So a little bit of unintentional team damage there, as I basically couldn't see that destroyer from my position as he passed right in front of me. And I'm certainly not going to blame him for doing it, because his alternative was to launch his torpedoes from behind me, in which case he would have probably sunk me. So at least he was taking care not to do damage to allies. I certainly can't blame him for that unintentional bit of friendly damage on my behalf. Still, it did have some unintended consequences, because I completely forgot to be paying attention to the Karlsruhe's torpedoes. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't realise that the German Tier 4 cruiser got torpedoes. I thought it was Tier 5 and up. So now I know, and it's not a mistake I'm going to make twice. Enemy Kirov up there, the Russian Tier 5 cruiser, just got himself deleted by a very ballsy attack from a Gnevny, the Russian Tier 5 destroyer, who closed to within 4 kilometres to get a torpedo kill. And there's another enemy Tier 4 cruiser, the Phoenix. Now, I need to be careful here, because these guys are all in full health, and there's a battleship up there. So I only have 6,800 health remaining. I'm peppering the Phoenix with a high explosive at first, and I'm slowing down to come to a halt behind this island and ensure that these guys are engaging, well, anything that isn't me. And it's a bit of a feeding frenzy at the moment. The enemy team have just lost 2 ships in the space of about 10 seconds, so there's just that Phoenix and the battleship off in the distance still in it. So, alright, fair enough. They've got all kinds of destroyer problems now, as our kamikaze R's are swarming all around them, so Tell the Chief Stoker to pop some more coal in the boilers, and off we go. And I've loaded the armour piercing because I'm in two minds about the armour piercing performance of these 130mm guns. In theory, I should be able to score some good damage on the broadside of a very lightly armoured scout cruiser like the Phoenix. But this is an extreme range, so this is going to be plunging fire hits. They're basically coming in from straight above. Yeah, and he saw, well, I don't know if he reacted because he saw me, but he certainly turned to avoid something, and so only one of those hit. 792 damage, second armour piercing salvo. And again, he's manoeuvring violently, one hit, 792 damage. That seems like an over-penetration on the thinly armoured stern of the ship, perhaps. Third armour piercing salvo, and again, one hit, and again, it looks like about 792 damage. So, well, the jury's really still out about the armour-piercing performance of these 130mm guns. I suspect I could do a damn sight better if I was closer, and the shots were taking a much, much flatter trajectory, so I could pound them right into the side of the ship and get some citadels going, or at least do a reasonable amount of armour-piercing damage, but I'm not at closer range, and so I switch back to the high explosive to finish him off. And at least with the high explosive, I mean, with an armour-piercing, a shell that hits at an oblique angle is going to bounce off and not do any damage. The high explosive is going to explode on impact, and it may knock out some guns. It might, for example, damage his steering, as that one just did, which means he's now stuck turning around in circles, which makes him an easier target for the rest of the team. And the battleship had just been sunk by one of the kamikaze, and he was the last one left alive on the enemy team. So, while I don't feel I really got the opportunity to thoroughly test out the armour-piercing performance of these 130mm guns, I certainly can't fault the performance of the high explosive. I mean, look at that. Fourth on experience earned in a Tier 3 cruiser. My first game in this Tier 3 cruiser, by the way, in a Tier 5 match. It was just the kamikaze who beat me to the punch, which isn't surprising because Tier 5 match and kamikaze are insanely good ships. But I'm certainly not unhappy with that result. I mean, first ever game in this ship. Fourth on experience earned in a Tier 5 game. Did 40,000 damage. Overwhelming majority of it with the high explosive. Never really got into the ideal situation to, well, with the possible exception of the fight against the Karlsruhe. And I did do a good, I mean, over 3,000 damage with one of the armour-piercing salvos, but that fight really didn't last very long. I wasn't the only one shooting at him. Yeah, I like this ship. This isn't bad at all. Not too sure about that Karlsruhe though. I mean, 19,700 health for a Tier 4 cruiser. I suspect that's going to be a painful grind. I mean, if you look at the St. Louis, which is also a Tier 3 cruiser, that has nearly 30,000 health. Yeah, I think I might have to free XP the Karlsruhe, get to the Königsberg instead. That looks like a good ship. But the Bogatyr, yes, I am definitely going to be coming back to this ship in exactly the same way that I keep coming back to the St. Louis, because they're both just such fun for exactly the same reasons. Anyway, that's it for today's World of Warships video, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Bogatyr, the Russian Tier 3 cruiser, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.